Hi, this is Brian Kim. I'm going to share with you case number 202 in the Best Way to Do Cataract Surgery series. This is a small pupil, and you're going to see double chop, cross chop, mechanical fracturing, and how I'm able to efficiently maneuver and pull pieces up out of the bag using the chopper. And so remember, when you have a small pupil, you really can't visualize where the pieces are, and you might try to go after pieces with vacuum because that's the way we were taught. But if you do that, you might grab the iris, you might grab the anterior capsule. And so the easiest and most efficient way and safest way in this context is really to use a chopper to pull the pieces up out of the bag, and you'll see that here. So use a cotton tip to steady the eye and use a corneal marker, which will help me to center inside the rhexis. I make my paracentesis incision first on the right side and then the left side, making sure I'm parallel to iris plane, which creates a nice corneal shelf, which will allow me to achieve a self-sealing incision. This is intracameral epinephrine, and then some dispersive viscoelastic to coat the corneal endothelium, flatten the anterior capsule, as well as viscodilate. This is the triplanar corneal incision. I make a vertical groove, place the blade into the deep part of the groove tunnel, and then when I'm ready, I tilt down and I enter. This patient has a little bit of a Bell's reflex. This is a right eye. And then I'm going to use a puncture style technique for my rhexis. Puncture the center, pull down, grab the right side of the tear, going around circumferentially, grabbing and re-grabbing. With these low profile microforceps, I'm able to do the rhexis without any significant worry about a radialization. And again, you saw that this is a fairly small pupil, which actually matches a corneal mark that I made relatively well. Just a little bit smaller. I'm able to just follow that contour and go all the way around. I use that cannula to hold the eye straight because, again, this patient has a Bell's reflex. This is a capsular fornix hydrodissection technique. I place a cannula under the rhexis edge contra-incisionally, point the tip down, get a nice wave, lift the lens up, tilts it, and allows me to decompress the capsular bag, sweeping on each side, and then the lens begins to spin. Irrigating the surface of the eye, lifting the incision with a chopper, going in with irrigation off to minimize Descemet's trauma, removing the surface epinuclear material, rotating and leading off with the chopper tip, sliding under the rhexis edge contra-incisionally, pointing the tip down when I get to the equator, turning the phaco tip vertically sub-incisionally, fracturing the lens completely in half. That's double chop, placing the chopper around the right heminucleus, laying it flat, sliding it under the rhexis edge, turning it vertical, hooking the peripheral lens, pulling it centrally toward the phaco tip, and fracturing the lens against the phaco tip, and that is a cross chop. You see, I'm trying to grab that first quadrant with some vacuum. That didn't work, and so I'm using the chopper to lift that piece up out of the bag, which happens very easily without much fuss, and then I'm able to emulsify that piece. I place the chopper around that second quadrant, hooking the peripheral lens, pulling it centrally toward the phaco tip, fracturing the lens against the phaco tip, and that fractures it in half, and then grabbing that piece and then emulsifying the lens piece. Hooking the peripheral lens once again, and then crushing it between the instruments, and then emulsifying the lens piece. Turning the second heminucleus in front of me, placing the chopper around the lens, and then fracturing it in a similar fashion, doing it again with another cross-chop maneuver around the third quadrant. You can see how efficient this is, and everything starts with the chopper. If you get comfortable with placing the chopper out to the equator, you can really bypass any of this other nonsense, trying to grab lens pieces with high vacuum and struggling to get lens pieces out of the bag. I've seen far too many people trying to grab pieces with high vacuum, and the bag is holding the lens. When you do that, you might go after with higher vacuum, the lens pieces start to fall apart, and then as you try to go and grab the lens piece, if it falls apart, well, guess what's on the other side is the posterior capsule. And so it's really not a very efficient way and more dangerous way to try to grab lens pieces, because if you fail to lift the piece up with high vacuum and the lens pieces start to fall apart, then you're bringing the phaco tip closer to the posterior capsule, please don't do that. Use a chopper, lift it up, and it's so easy to remove those lens pieces and hooking it with the chopper. Remove the epinuclear material, which comes out quite easy. So I take the chopper out, push BSS in, take the phaco tip out, and I go in with the INA handpiece. There's some fragments at the incision there. Grab it before it tries to fly away and hide under the iris, which can happen sometimes. Go after the cortical material. I always start sub-incisionally, peeling from anterior to posterior, which gives you the cleanest cortical removal. Switching to polish mode, polishing underneath the rexus edge. You saw there was a big chunk there, so I switched back to cortex mode and then removing that piece. Switching back to polish mode, polishing under the rexus edge. Again, there's another large piece. Switch to cortex mode and then peel that piece out. Polishing the posterior capsule. Using the foot pedal to control my modes is really very efficient and the easiest way and gives me the best control. I'm able to toggle between the polish mode and cortex mode on my own with ease. Pulse into the subincisional capsule fornix, which was clean, and then filling the bag with cohesive viscoelastic, turning irrigation off as I do that. This is a small pupil. If it was going to be a floppy iris, I just wanted to make sure that the iris wasn't going to come out, so I turn off the irrigation as I do that. Since this is a small pupil, I'm going to forego the sweeping, and I go in with the single piece acrylic lens and I turn the eye away from me so I can see the contralateral rexus edge, so I can make sure that the optic goes underneath the rexus edge as the lens is delivered. I go in with irrigation off, activate irrigation, tilting and rotating the lens 90 degrees, making sure that both haptics are indeed within the bag, removing all the viscoelastic from within the bag, repositing the optic back down. Switching to polish mode, polishing under the rexus edge of lens epithelial cells. Switching to visco mode, removing all the viscoelastic from the anterior chamber, and then I'll hydrate my incision. So again, this is a patient with a small pupil, not a very dense lens at all actually, but you saw him able to leverage mechanical fraction forces, double chop, cross chop, hooking the peripheral lens, getting under the rexus edge, doing this efficiently and confidently. And why am I so confident? Because I do it all the time. It's really second nature. I don't think about it. People look at this and they get really nervous. Well, that's because they don't do it all the time and they're not comfortable doing it. If you do it the way you're taught, which is basically grabbing lens pieces with high vacuum, if you do that with high vacuum, which could happen with this soft lens, the lens pieces will start to break apart, because if the bag is holding the lens, as you try to lift that lens piece up, it won't come. And so then you'll just break it up. You'll just break it into smaller bits. You're just breaking up the parts that you're grabbing, but you're not actually pulling the lens out. So it's very inefficient. And then if you try to grab more lens pieces, you're getting closer and closer to the posterior capsule, which is very risky and very dangerous. It makes no sense to me to try to grab lens pieces and pull them up out of the bag with high vacuum, especially in these soft lenses, but even with dense lenses, because you have to impale it and activate ultrasonic energy and go and go into the lens and impale it to get purchase, and then high vacuum to hold the lens piece. But again, if you do that too aggressively, you might go through the posterior capsule. Why do that? I used to do it that way a long time ago when I was trained, and then lo and behold, sometimes I would get a posterior capsule rupture. I don't ever have that problem anymore. You just take that chopper, hook the peripheral lens, pop it up, or you can perform cross chop, and you're able to efficiently disassemble the lens within the bag from various angles. And so it's very efficient. You don't have to rotate the lens. And this is why I feel like this is the best way to do cataract surgery. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I thank you for your attention.